Welcome. This will be my video on the 2017 Yorgos Lanthimos movie, The Killing of a Sacred Deer. The movie is rated R, so will this video be. I am going to keep the review itself completely spoiler-free, and after the review, which I will verbally let you know when it ends, that is the only time I will get into spoilers in what I call the thoughts section. The rest of the video after that point will have spoilers for this movie. I'm not intending to spoil any other media. If I decide to do so, I will verbally let you know before doing so. Now, I just want to make sure I don't forget to recommend some other leftist YouTubers, so I'm going to start with that. So, if you haven't already watched, Door Monsters, When the Adaptation is Better. Jack Saints, How Do I Know Who the Bad Guy Is? A response to @Fantano. Curators, Wife Talk with Justin and Roz. Thomas Flight, Why Does Most Acting Win All the Awards? And also make sure you watch Additional Lily Alexandra's The Video That Made Me a Feminist. Absolutely agreed with her. Just wanted to, I mean, I agree with a lot of things said in the various videos, but yeah, I do not understand why so many people think that Red was, yeah, you know what, just watch the video and know that I agree with Lily. Now, I think a good place to start is, so this is my second Yorgos Lanthimos movie, and, you know, the first one was Dogtooth. Now, in some ways, these two movies are very different from one another, and, you know, sometimes you find a director and you watch one of their movies and you're like, this was fucking amazing. I have got to watch more. And then you watch another one and you're like, shit. I don't know. Maybe they just only had one truly good movie in them, and you find yourself just, I don't know, maybe not watching more by that director. I don't know. Has that ever happened to you? It hasn't happened to me recently. Yes, we are very much, I'm not going to name specific titles, but I am definitely intending to do more Yorgos Lanthimos because, my God, it has been a while since he just fucking grips and does not let go for the entire duration. You know, so yeah, watch two. Both of these are slow burns. Like, there was a while where I was like, I don't know, do I really want to watch more slow burns? And then I remembered how amazing they can be, just under the right circumstances. So yeah, the act is over. This is going to be a largely positive video. If I say something in this video that sounds neutral, please consider that it is not meant as a negative. Like, it's just, yeah. I don't think I'm gonna point it out every single time. Just if I say something and it doesn't sound, and you're not confident that it's criticism, then it's almost definitely not. Like, some of what I will say in this video is going to be descriptive and neutral, and that's, you know, yeah, and some of that is actually meant as praise. It's just, yeah. Anyway, I think yeah, let's get into the writing. So, as mentioned, I'm not giving much away. So all I will say is we are following a family unit and something, there's something more than what is immediately evident. And let's see, yeah, honestly, that's gonna be it for that. Anyway, yeah, setup and payoff is quite good. There are various things that, you know, like, you notice, but you do not know where it's going to come back and in what way. And I think that is, yeah, so tension and suspense are very nicely handled. Like, I had the sense that there would be something more than what we were immediately presented with. Fortunately, I didn't know any spoilers going in, but the well, I mean, I knew some of the stuff that would eventually appear because I watched the trailer. It is very much one of those movies where if you sometimes find yourself sitting and waiting through a movie for the stuff that's in the trailer, it might be best for you to not watch the trailer. I try not to do that, or at least not to an extent where it like has a negative impact on the viewing experience. But they do a really solid job on the trailer, not giving too much away overall, because like you see images, but without context, it's not really going to, I really appreciate how much they managed to not give away. There are things that could have been powerful in the trailer, but would absolutely have given too much away. So if you have already watched the trailer and not yet the movie, trust me, there's some stuff in there that you, have not seen there. Now, but yeah, basically, sorry to mention, slow burn. The tension and suspense, it's this thing of like, you have a bad feeling, but it's not constantly in your face about how scary and upsetting something is. It's just letting you sit with it. My God, is he good at that. Just having us see and or hear something where it's just, I absolutely do not blame anyone who watches just a tiny bit of one of his movies and are like, you know what, I'm good. That's yeah. And so psychological accuracy, authenticity, both to itself and the real world, and level of detail are all very impressive. Considering Lanthimos, it is, of course, it's not trying to be, it's not a documentary, Mom, but there is a lot to look at and examine, of the way that people talk and how they react to certain situations and such. And I would say it stays completely true to itself. It never felt like there was some compromise, which from what I hear, it sounds like to this day, Lanthimos, 9 years later. Sorry, it's because different places this movie is listed as being from 2017 or 2018, but I'm going off the IMDb one that says 2017. But yeah, 9 years later, from what I understand, he has not yet, compromised, and I hope he manages to keep. Yeah. Let's see. I think that does. Yeah. So the tone. It has this very sort of. So it feels like we are kind of just witnessing. There's this sort of sense of almost being kept at arm's length, at least at times. I don't think I want to give away how much of it I would, say is doing that. When, like, this is a movie that could very easily have been, I'm really glad that it's not particularly like Hollywood. I'm sure there's a compelling Hollywood version of this. I'm really glad that's not what Lanthimos made here. And yeah, like, it's a movie where, so I think it's gonna make more sense if I make a comparison here. So I have not watched that many of M. Night Shyamalan's movies. It really does. I know it's going to sound ridiculous. I actually have not watched The Sixth Sense. I might at some point. I am open to watching more of his work. It's just not going to be, I'm not going to be a completist about it. I'm not going to watch everything because I've heard too many negative things about too many of them. But the ones I have watched are, I guess I'll start with the only one that okay. I need to just finish the fucking sentence. Okay, so the ones I've watched are Unbreakable, Signs, which is probably, Signs is probably my least favorite of them, Split, and Glass. And I'm considering watching The Visit. I'm not sure I'm going to watch anything else of his. I don't know. I mean, if you think that there's at least one more of his movies that I would just fucking love based on, quite enjoying, yeah. Like, I mean, if hypothetically, if I was going to watch Signs for the first time today, I'd probably like it. Fine. I wouldn't be unhappy that I watched it. So based on the 4 that I've watched and, liking or loving them, if you think there's one other than The Visit that you recommend to me, let me know in the comments, Something that has been noted about M. Night Shyamalan is that characters, let's see, I forget who, but someone said it's a bit like that the acting, the line delivery is reminiscent of like people talking at a funeral. So everyone's talking kind of quietly and calmly, and they're very sad about what happened. And that is, yeah, in my experience, there's some truth to that. It's not 100% every single character that I've seen him write and direct. And there is some of that going on here as well. I would probably say overall I felt it may have worked better here than, I don't know. I mean, it definitely did work well in Unbreakable also. Okay, Split. I don't know. Overall, I'd say I felt like it worked even better here than there. And maybe part of it is the fact that it's not it's not always the case. There were times where it felt like, okay, this character should probably have a larger reaction than what we've seen them have in the past, and they did. Now, yeah, so the dialogue, I really appreciate this mix of like things that it's crucial we hear and understand because of certain things that I'm not going to give away, but also these like banal conversations that I never felt like bored by. Like it's very difficult to not make that kind of thing feel like, yeah, a trial for the viewer. But yeah, he absolutely manages. And yeah, I mean, I'd say 10 minutes in, I certainly did notice that the movie was, dialogue was about 30% people talking about wrist watches, which, yeah, it's not really criticism. It's just like that, yeah, that's something people talk about, And, yeah, it definitely, writing quality-wise, it is 100% up to the level of Dogtooth. It's just fairly different. I think one thing I really wanted to highlight as, one reviewer, I'm afraid I don't remember the name and my wrists are too fucking sorry to check right now, but at least one reviewer noted that this was less of a sort of one-to-one allegory than something like Dogtooth. And yeah, I would absolutely agree. And I don't think everything he makes needs to be. And it definitely does have food for thought. you know, I think that does pretty much cover the script. So the direction, um, yeah, the way that actually, this is a good time to bring up another. There was also a critic quote that noted that this felt like classic Kubrick, and I absolutely agree. Like that's, I already mentioned the sort of keep you at arm's length, kind of almost detached kind of thing. One of the major elements I recognized Kubrick in was the cinematography, because like I want to underline there are times where this just uses medium shots and such. And when it goes for close-up, it's not necessarily going to go for like a super close-up. It is not the stalker vision of a non-zero number of sequences in X-Men Dark Phoenix. But there definitely are sometimes more close-ups than one might expect. And I definitely noticed that there were times where you would expect a medium and maybe some camera movement, but instead, I mean, there are parts of this where the camera is a bit at a distance, and I'm not the best at the whole lens conversation, and I wish I was, because sometimes it's important, and this feels like an important one, but I definitely noticed there were times where the choice of lens felt unusual for the and it has this very effective off-putting effect. It is a movie that is like it gets disturbing, but for a bunch of it is just off-putting. Like there's just something. It's like the movie somehow put like a stone in the shoe of everyone watching, and you like take off your shoe and try to get it out of there, and you look and there's no stone. Like it's this, you can't put your finger on it, and there's just something off. There's just ugh. And yeah, wonderful. It's very, very impressive. There are movies that will have like 10 times as much energy as this at like scaring the viewer, and like not even a fraction of the impact of that. Yeah, there are a number of shots that are at a distance where I certainly felt like they were establishing the hell out of that. But yeah, just the it feels wrong, but in the right way, to be that far away from characters that are like main or major characters, and we're clearly meant to like we might even hear what they're saying, but they take up very little of the frame, and it just yeah, it has quite the impact, and it never felt like that's another thing that I swear this is not just going to be me criticizing M. Night Shyamalan, but there have also been, some have noted that sometimes his style feels like he's just kind of, he likes a specific shot, and so he uses it without it being super motivated, and that never felt like the case here. It always felt like there was a reason for why it was filmed like that. And the same goes for the editing. And when it comes to the editing, there are a couple of little things that I can't really give away. I'll discuss them in the thought section for sure. But yeah, it does some things that you might not expect it to, and I really appreciated the way that, like Dogtooth, there are scenes that go on for a little while. There are scenes that are really, really short, and yeah, Lanthimos just gets it. Like that's a very difficult, I've noticed a number of really talented directors will opt for one of the two, and I hesitate. Okay, it's important to note, I'm not saying one of these is easy. Good filmmaking is not easy, no matter what exactly you're doing. Some is more convenient and some is like choices made out of limitations or such, but it is not easy. But there certainly is, if you make scenes tend to either be very short and move fast, like, the Crank movies, Gamer by the same duo, Neville Dean Taylor duo, or if you make scenes somewhat longer, certainly I've noticed, I don't know, I guess I've more noticed it in movies that are a little bit older and, made by specific auteurs. I relatively recently rewatched, Andrei Rublev, one of the masterpieces by Andrei Tarkovsky, and that one has a bit more of a tendency for scenes to linger, and that was the right choice there. Yeah, I think, and yeah, this one also makes the right choices. But yeah, I think that might bring us to, yeah, so I was very impressed by the production value, set design, locations, costumes, and makeup. They all managed to convey things about the characters. Yeah, as far as production value goes, it never feels cheap, and you get a sense out of, the various characters, where they live, what their workplace looks like, where they perhaps choose to spend some leisure time, stuff like that. And yeah, it's also a movie that, like, considering how, I'm not going to give away the number, but it has a higher number of sets and locations than one might think for how constrained it can feel. And I mean that in a really positive way, because like that is crucial for the movie to accomplish what it's setting out to do, and that is not easy to do. Like, once again, I'm not saying the following is easy, but a tried and true trick of filmmaking, of cinematic language, if you want your characters to feel trapped, if you want that conveyed to the audience, you don't need to literally have them in a cell. But if they don't have a lot of freedom of movement, or, if they don't go to very many different places, if there's something keeping them within a specific area, that can have quite the impact there. And here, it wasn't really that. For one thing, like, the family we're following clearly do well financially. There's not really a, limitation as far as that goes, and yet it very much manages to, yeah, like it felt like being just, yeah, incarcerated with the characters, basically. Now, I think, yeah, that brings us nicely to the music. So this one has more music than Dogtooth. I really appreciated how carefully weighed every decision felt about, I mean, everything, but the music was one of the places where I also really, really noticed, because there's a couple of times where they will, on more than one occasion, they will use an actual piece of like classical music to really great effect. But there are times where something plays out in silence, at least music-wise. And then there are times where it will play score, and sometimes it even gets dramatic, but it never felt like it was like hitting you over the head with like, feel like this. And I noticed that some of the pieces of music did not use very many different instruments, which like one of the first, actually I think the very first piece of music played is like, I couldn't put words to it, but I can imagine it was a piece of classical music that was, composed before this. And yeah, a number of the other ones, they actually, come to think of it, I'm right now I forget if the classical music that might have been composed before it was also, and anyway, something I certainly noticed with what, from what I could tell, was original score composed specifically for this. A number of them would either only use one instrument or only one type of instrument. Like there was at least one where it was clearly piano, one where I'm not sure if it was more than one string instrument, but best I could tell, only string instruments. And yeah, like it worked so well. The tension, yeah, a good percentage of it is down to the music. Like this is music that you could listen to and be really ill at ease at pretty much any time. And the sound design is fantastic. I don't know that I can really go into detail. I'll just say there are things that needed to sound exactly right, and they always do. And yeah, I was invested in every major character. There were... Yeah, I don't think I'm going to give too much away. I'll just say, with each of them, I felt I learned enough that I cared, and never so much that I was confident that I could determine what the outcome would be. Because that is sometimes, this is a horror movie. Sometimes if one particular character, like sometimes it's the casting, sometimes it's how much screen time they get, but sometimes you can kind of tell, oh, okay, I know where this actor is in their career trajectory. They're playing this character. And I'm not saying that's always what happens, because certainly there are times where they completely subvert that. But yeah, genuinely, I was not sure how this was going to... Yeah. Let's see. All of them felt, at least close to real people, like close enough that I was never like really I yeah, I never really struggled to understand why anyone did what they did. And ultimately I would say Dogtooth as well, but if you're trying to decide between one of these two and you're like it's very important to you that characters don't behave in ways that feel weird, then I would say this one is, at least less weird behavior comparatively. And it's important to note that is, of course, also purposeful, because that one is about a very different situation than this one. I guess that brings us nicely to the acting. So I was already a big fan of, I think I'm only going to say his last name once because I'm not 100%. I believe I know how to say it. Barry Keoghan. Colin Farrell and Nicole Kidman. Barry is definitely someone I need to watch more of. Wow, is it really only... I guess it's a spoiler to say at least one of the others. Okay, what I'll say is, yeah. Come to think of it, it might actually be... I think he's a spoiler character in more than one other thing I've seen him in. But I'll... yeah. I've been impressed with him every time he's popped up in something. And yeah, Farrell, like There's a bunch of his stuff I haven't watched, but yeah, both Farrell and Kidman were ones I started watching in the late 1990s, I think. So yeah, very impressed by, like, I remember back then there was some sense that, like, oh, he's like rock star with charisma, but I certainly remember some were saying he was not very talented as an actual actor. I don't know that I ever particularly agreed, but I certainly remember that was the thing, and I have not heard anyone say that about him in some time now. I've been very, very impressed. But I mean, I guess other than this, fairly recently, The Batman and Widows were ones where I was really, like, very impressed by him. And yeah, Kidman certainly was very much someone who, yeah, I remember, in the 90s and early 2000s, not everyone really had a lot of respect for her. And it's one of those really sucky things. She's an actress who is willing to get naked, sexualize herself on camera. And some people, I don't know, these days, when I listen to leftists, which is most of what when I listen to political stuff, it tends to be leftists. I used to listen more to conservatives just to hear what they had to say. And, in recent years, I just, they're so many of them are so extreme. I mostly just hear their arguments when they pop up to be countered in leftist videos, and yeah, I'm satisfied with that. But anyway, I will admit, in the 90s and early 2000s, there were leftists who would judge actresses and, in the case of music videos, also, female musicians for that kind of thing. And I'm really glad that, these days it's much rarer for me to come across a sex negative leftist. I get it, respectability politics. There was this idea that you had to, and certainly, I mean, I get why some felt that, for example, the hippies were a little too eager with free love, because, like, I'm very sex positive. I think, as long as there's consent and protection and, like, be safe about it in general, that sort of thing. Other than that, I pretty much don't think there should be limitations. Keeping in mind that consent includes, only, if everyone participating has to be of age, and, no one should be under the influence to the point where they can't consent, things like that. I mean, obviously, if you have a tiny buzz or something, that's and animals cannot consent, nor can corpses. So I believe that covers everything. Yeah, the yeah, I don't know. I admire a lot about the hippies. I almost definitely sound like a hippie at times myself. There are things I still agree with them on. I do appreciate there was definitely, one of the reasons why, sex was less. I'm way belaboring this point. Anyway, yeah, I think I've covered. Anyway, yeah, Nicole Kidman was judged for this, and today I'm seeing that a lot less from leftists. So that's yeah, really, really great. Because, like, like, yeah, let's see. I think the oldest thing I've watched of hers, well, I guess it is from the 90s. Maybe did she act in the 80s? I'm not entirely sure. I don't think I've ever been, like, super underwhelmed by one of her performances. I remember that some didn't like her work in, was it Stoker maybe? But I don't know. It felt just, like, subtle to me more than bad. But anyway, yeah, they all do really, really well here. And this also has the this actress who played, she was in Snow White and the Huntsman as young Snow White, so the Kristen Stewart character. and I was very impressed by her in that. Apparently, she was also in. I looked her up before this. She was also in Dark Shadows. I have to admit, I don't really as a young Angelique. I gotta admit, I don't really remember that, but maybe it went by fast. But I was certainly, in both this and Snow White and the Huntsman. She has this ability to convey some positive emotion, but it can be like there can be a lot of just, if not outright sadness, like there's some tempering of the positive feelings, and she comes across as very sensitive. Her characters do, I mean, very sensitive, and I was impressed by how well she fit into both of these movies with fairly different acting styles, and like tones as far as and I think that does pretty much. Yeah, and Barry here was also very different from what I've seen from him before. So that was also really great. And so I already talked some about the pacing. I think it's worth noting that this is 20 minutes longer, I think, or so than Dogtooth. And I remember, with Dogtooth, that was very much a movie you were just like, okay, if this was much longer, it would just be excessive. And this one is less sort of, it's not as, how best to put it? Dogtooth is a movie that really does, like, show you deeply shocking things, and that worked for that movie. This one, it's less, less that, and more this kind of thing of like, that's not quite right kind of thing, more, like I said, a stone in your shoe, where like Dogtooth, it's like you're constant, it's like you are Sideshow Bob stepping on one rake after another, like constantly. It's, or not constantly, but a number of times in that movie there's stuff that really is, I think I've made my points. I'm gonna move on. I can actually, I don't have to imagine, because I remember at least one critic in their blurb said that they felt like it was too slow, and I understand why. I didn't feel that way about it myself, and certainly, like, I would say I was a little bit surprised. It's so I think the thing is, Dogtooth, like, you realize immediately there's something really wrong here. You can't necessarily, you don't immediately know as many details as you get later, but it's that much is clear. In this one, it is not right away that it establishes some things before getting into sort of something that is more, I'm not going to give it away, but I understand why some felt that was slow, and maybe the movie in general, I could see people feeling it was slow, and it's definitely not for everyone, and I'm really, really happy to be watching more that I can describe as that, because I think I have, there was a while where I watched a lot of the whole four quadrant thing. It was too much of like, let's try to please everyone. And I still have a lot of fondness for those. I'm not going to stop watching or doing videos on them. But it is really great to, I mean, that was part of why I did, every David Cronenberg movie that I had access to as well. Now, I think that does bring us to, so I'm not going to give any of them away, but what there, or how much, but what there is of special effect, or effects work in this, very, very good. Actually, I guess I will add that at least some of it, I would argue, qualifies as stunt work, and I am going to rack my brain later trying to figure out how the fuck they did at least one of those safely. Yeah, that's definitely gonna move the magic, love. And yeah, I think I have pretty much covered. Yeah, we're. I did want to say I'm not gonna give too much away, but the reason that it is R-rated, I felt like they did a good job with. Nothing felt gratuitous. It all worked towards an end rather than being treated as an end in and of itself. I don't think that horror has to mean something, but I do think ideally, I appreciate sometimes it's there for entertainment purposes, but I think, yeah, the kind of stuff that gets you a rating higher than like G, it's good if it leads to something, if there is some purpose for it rather than just like, oh, look at what we can do. Like, I don't know. Hopefully at this point it's clear. I have very thick skin. I don't think there's very much in fiction that can still like get me to a place where I would just say, okay, that should not be in there. At most, I'll say, I wish they had been more sensitive about that particular thing, or things like that. But outright saying, you can't put that in a movie, that's extremely rare for me. You got to go very, very far for that. As a quick example, Sinister, especially that first movie. Yeah, there's some incredibly fucked up stuff in that movie. It's not a movie that I personally feel like they had to remove any of those things. And if I had had them described before watching, I probably would have said, I don't think I'm going to like that. But yeah, that's fucking Scott Derrickson for you. And I just realized why. Just yesterday, I read the Outlaw Vern review of Black Phone 2. So Scott Derrickson's on my mind right now. I was happy to see that Vern also appreciated that movie. Now, I think that does pretty much cover the... yeah. I think overall, if I had to choose one of these two movies, you know what? I'm actually not entirely sure I can. I should have realized that before I started that sentence. Yeah, I think they work incredibly well at what they, both completely accomplish what they set out to do. I guess what I will say is I'm glad that, sometimes when the first movie someone makes is really, really popular, they'll make another, right. So obviously I do appreciate he made more movies in between these two. This is just, this one is currently free to stream. If some of the others, like, at this point, I don't know that there's any movie, like, let me know if you know of a Lanthimos movie where you're like, stay away from that one. But other than that, I'm probably going to watch. And when I feel I have something to say, do videos on pretty much any of his that I, so far two that were free to stream. And yeah, I'm going to keep an eye out for more of them on a few services, most of them free. Disney Plus is the only one I'm paying for. Anyway, yeah, I'm really glad that he didn't try to just make the same, I don't know, maybe he did with one of the others, but it really is great to see such a different. Like, it's very clear his fingerprints are all over both of these. You know, if you watch one of these two and then the other, and no one told you that it was written and directed by the same person, and you didn't see that in the credits, you'd still be able to see. Yeah, I rate this 8 off-putting slow burns out of 10, and that brings us to the thoughts section. So from here on out, I'm spoiling absolutely everything about this movie. So I think I will try to keep it mostly chronological. So yeah, obviously would be hypocritical if right after saying, or contradictory at least, if at this point I said that I didn't need to see, I believe open heart surgery was what we were watching. So I'm not, because, yeah, I accept that's, if I couldn't handle seeing something like that, I wouldn't be watching Yorgos Lanthimos, obviously. Like, I didn't know it was coming, but, like, it's one of those things, I don't want to see real footage of someone purposefully harming someone else. Like at most, if it's like documenting a crime or something, I might watch it to make sure I can better judge the situation. But it's surgery. I read that the surgery was it was a successful surgery. So they were helping that, and yeah, it wasn't even elective. It was like life saving. So they filmed a I think you know what I'm trying to say. My tongue doesn't. That's what we were seeing. And yeah, like under those circumstances, I am comfortable with it. I will probably look away if Lanthimos does at some point put, like, even if it is like mostly tastefully done, but I cannot stand watching people harmed in real life. But yeah, immediately it's off-putting. And we know deep down, like, it shouldn't be. Like, this is a good thing, though. Part of it is that it's close up, Like, I've seen scenes where they will use, I've seen a little bit of ER. Like, they might show, the actors, miming performing the surgery, or maybe even, have, like, prosthetic, and maybe we'll get a close-up of, I actually forget if they use real or if it's always staged with practical effects, but whatever, they will show stuff where it's like, uncomfortable for us to watch, because it's just like, we don't like seeing, penetrated flesh. That's just, but yeah, having it just like that, immediately off-putting, even though what we're seeing is a good thing. Like, they're saving someone's life. This is, I fucking love science. It's incredible what we can do. And I feel like, is the next thing that yeah, then we have then we watch the watch be discussed. And yeah, just these little things, the way that it is, this, I mean, so one thing going on here, the movie accomplishes in dialogue what Back to the Future Part 1 does with visuals, at the, both open in a way that tells you this movie's about time. And yeah, knowing how much time you have left in this particular movie's case. I mean, that one's about time travel, so that's not a spoiler. Hopefully you already knew that. But but yeah, I appreciate it, because it is like, it should be so banal. But yeah, because they're just on about, like, how waterproof is it? What kind of, is it metal or is it leather? Those kinds of things, and think about, like, maybe I'll buy a new one. Tell you what, I'll bring you to the place where I bought one. I'll introduce you as a friend of mine. You'll get a discount. these are conversations people just have in the real world, you know. So it is very much setting up, like, yeah, they're just fairly regular people, you know. It's not, boy, was it a contrast from the opening of Dogtooth, which once again, I'm not going to spoil here. That's a vague enough statement that you don't. But yeah. Um, let's see. Yeah, and you know, so he goes home. Family seems fairly well adjusted. They're also having conversations that are not the most, you know. I think that's when they talk about like how Bob has grown his hair out, and you have the thing about like, Bob, I told you, you're gonna have to cut that hair. You know, the reviewer saying these words exactly right now already is talking too much about hippies in this video. Don't make him say that you kind of starting to look like one. And, you know, there's the thing about like how, you know, Kim is going to go to a party, and, you know, the parents are like, you know, let's say, I think it's Steven who's like, your mom and I are going to have to talk about, you know, Bob wants to go to the party too, and Steven's like, Bob, I don't know, we're gonna need to talk about, you know. And then she, Alice, I think was her name. She's a little, I gotta keep track because Alicia Silverstone. Oh my God, I completely forgot to mention. Yeah, Alicia Silverstone's another one that I've been a fan of since like the 1990s. And yeah, there was a while where most of what I saw her in, it was kind of, you know, charisma. I don't know. I think I also just, I was a little unfortunate with the ones I watched, because I have heard that she was great even back then. Let's see, was Clueless one where she was really impressive, for example? I feel like I've heard that. I might watch that at some point. Anyway, but yeah, she's also someone that in more recent years, you know, I've definitely been impressed by. I'm really glad she's still around. There's too many that I was like a big fan of in the 1990s and early 2000s that just I don't see appear in anything anymore, and it's too bad. Anyway, but yeah, I believe that her name is Alice, not Alicia Silverstone, but yeah, and yeah, you know, Alice is like, actually, I know, you know, the parents of, or no, not sorry, not the parents, the friend, Kim's friend. I'm comfortable with Bob going to that party, you know. Yeah, just completely straightforward family talk. You know, I'd say the first 10-15 minutes, it's just, you know, there's nothing really super abnormal that we're seeing. Sometimes the way it's filmed will be, you know, but yeah. Yeah, and it's like, aren't we 40 minutes in before the first time that, yeah, that's when Bob says he literally can't get out of bed. You know, yeah, that's when it really starts with that's when we have something that's clearly, really, genuinely wrong, especially once we see, you know, they send him home, they're like, nothing wrong, the tests are fine, you know, and he falls over, you know, so that's very, very clear. Yeah, I think that is when he talks to Martin for the first time. We have that thing about how Martin, on more than, you know, non-zero number of occasions, will show up to the hospital and just wait for Steven, not call ahead. And Steven says he's not mad. It's just like, you know, I don't want you to have to sit here and wait for a long time. Meanwhile, he also does not tell, and that's where my memory for the names ends, the anesthesia. I'm going to try one more time. Anesthesiologist. The ologist is, I don't know what, you know, the, right now I forget, what were they called again? The people who came up with Latin? I don't know what they had against, like, a tongue that sits comfortably and isn't trying to say multiple letters that are difficult to say in quick succession. But then, I mean, you also have it in some like American, like the sixth sense is tougher to say. It's a tongue twister, tough to say fast multiple times. Anyway, the ologist, you know, when, yeah, He introduces them, but he claims that Martin is a friend of Kim. But yeah, and he says, he says he wants to be a doctor, which I'm not sure that's true. I don't think he has the highest opinion of you, Dr. Steven. But that's also an interesting, because like that does tell us, at that point, Steven kind of thinks, younger people look up to. I mean, he's with Bob. It's the mom, and I am afraid I forget the exact pronunciation, but I feel confident she's an eye doctor. And yes, I knew that before he said, I don't trust your medical opinion because this isn't about eyesight. But it wasn't optometrist, optologist maybe? Yeah. Anyway, he kind of thinks like, we're amazing. Kids look up to us, and that's not right. And that's part of why Martin gets so close. So yeah, very nicely done on that. Just a subtle little thing, because like it, at face value, it sounds, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm overanalyzing. I haven't known to do that. It's gonna keep happening. So I'm comfortable with it, is what I'm saying. Hopefully you are as well. Yeah, a lot of doctors, when they talk to young people, they assume, and sometimes rightly so, that, this kid really looks up to me, which, fair enough. A lot of them, yeah, I already mentioned, it's an amazing thing. I am, like, sometimes I find myself thinking about the fact that human beings, for, like, the longest fucking time, would die at, like, age 30-something, and now we have people living 3 times as long as that. Like, it's unreal to think about how much we're able to do now. I think that does, but then yeah, and we also, through that, like the fact that Martin shows up without calling ahead, even after he's been told before that he has to do that, or should, just for his own sake, he's obsessed with Steven, clearly, and we have those little things of like, let's see, there's the thing with the, isn't that also when we get the gift giving? He likes giving gifts to this family, and I couldn't help but notice that he gave 2 of them, both Bob and Kim, he gave them keychains, which I appreciate is one of those things of like, I mean, yeah, if you're just trying to say, because it's the kind of thing of like, I care about you. I want you to have something to remember me by, but it's also not going to break the bank. Well, I guess in America it might, but I certainly have bought keychains that were not particularly expensive, and were still, like a cool kind, like the ones he gives. And it's also like, Kim cares about music, so here's a keychain with a musical note on it, that is genuinely like, just, it's a nice thing to do. But on face value, however, he gives keychains to 2 members of the family, and both of those members of the family are specifically the 2, because he says later in the movie that it's going to be 3 of them. It's the 3 other than Steven will, end up unable to walk. And it's possible it would have happened if we had seen, but he also says, once they start bleeding from the eyes, it's not going to be very long. At that point in the movie, Alice is still walking. Alice never becomes incapacitated. So I don't know if he, I wouldn't rule out that it is just general gift giving kind of thing, because he gives her flowers, but I wouldn't rule out that he was like lying a little bit about that. And it's maybe the keychain, because I know there are certain, so personally I don't really believe in anything supernatural, but I appreciate the cultural value of mythology. I'm very fond of Norse mythology, and not just because I'm Danish. Also ancient Greek mythology. I appreciate the kinds of things that we can learn from looking at the way they told these stories, the ideas that are expressed, the ways that they perceive the world in lieu of having more like objective knowledge, which they didn't have the kind of science that we do today. But I appreciate that there are mythologies, there are ideas of magic where giving the person, it's sometimes it's giving, sometimes it's taking, but a personal item can be crucial in order to accomplish. Because I feel like it's got to be a curse, right? That's what we're looking at in this movie. And yeah, it doesn't look like these are cursed items. It just seems like he cares about, and wants to help, because maybe, what it appears to Steve is that Martin appreciates Steve being there for Martin after he was sadly unable to save his father. Now, I think that does bring us to, let's see, yeah, I believe that brings us to the part where he introduces them. And I couldn't help but notice, so he introduces, and I get that it is, let's see, wasn't it him who brought it up, who said, like, I want to meet your family, or what? Or was it the other way around? Or did he say, you should meet my family now that I've met yours? There was something. Anyway, but certainly, later he tells Alice, he has serious mental problems, psychological problems. He always did. Why'd you introduce him to your family? I don't know. I couldn't help but notice, and I appreciate it. Listen, I would like to think that it's because Stephen did really think that he could help Martin, because there's the thing about, what was it he said? Something along the lines of, I don't think it's possible to have very many friends, which that sounds like rationalizing by someone who is struggling to make friends, and hey, I am not the best at making friends, but it's the kind of, like, I know extroverts who have many, many friends. They're not necessarily all like super close friends, but friends, period, like that few friends, that's so maybe he thinks that, well, maybe he could be friend of the entire family, but I also noticed that there were times where he was reluctant to accept things the way they were and would behave in genuinely upsetting ways to kind of, like the way he he tells Bob, let's walk, and then just drags him around when it's obvious that Bob is not even close to walking, and then lets him fall and says, if you are lying, you have to stop right now. If I find out later you were lying, I will shave off your hair and make you eat it. Do you understand? I will make you eat your own hair. Like, Jesus fucking Christ. What is this middle school bully bullshit? Jesus. I feel like taking him to a barber would probably solve this problem of him having too long hair, if that's what you're so upset about. But yeah, he is sometimes reluctant to accept reality. And he later says, which that line was in the trailer. And even at the time, I was like, I don't think that's even remotely true. He claims, sure, an ologist could hypothetically, kill a patient. In fact, mine had, in the actual movie, he goes on to say, the one, he totally has, like, okay, I feel like you could have taken that one to your grave or directly to the police. It feels really fucked up to be saying that to her, like, because you just put her in a really shitty situation. Is she gonna, like, confront the ologist about that? Is she gonna go to the cops and say you should investigate this guy? Anyway. But yeah, he says, an ologist could kill a patient, but a surgeon can't. A surgeon can never kill a patient. And yeah, the moment I heard that in the trailer, I was like, I feel like that's going to be significant, and yeah, I wasn't, it didn't spoil it. It didn't ruin the movie for me. You know, I'm perfectly happy to have known that there was going to be, because the trailer also has the line, "How did his father die?" You know, so I figured, okay, there's probably something there. You know, but yeah, and later in the movie, I don't know. I feel like the ologist has no reason to lie, because he wasn't even like facing an accusation of, because let's see, Stephen didn't say it was his fault. He said there's nothing we could do. So and you know, Alice didn't say, is this your fault? She just asked, you know, had Stephen been drinking? And the answer is, you know, yes, and it was too much, and you know, nobody knows but me, but that's why Martin's father died. And I have a feeling that Martin realized that at some point. And I also really appreciate, because like, yeah, this is right. I did see in the IMDb trivia, the spoiler section, this has some, took some inspiration from a myth. I have not read that myth, so I cannot comment on. I'm sure someone else has. You know, this movie has been talked about. I'll leave it to people who've like read, maybe even studied that myth, rather than me trying to, you know. But yeah, this idea of, you know, he made a mistake, got somebody else's, you know, a member of somebody else's family killed, and now a survivor of that family is going to force him to kill one of his own or lose all of them. That does feel like a mythological story, you know. Let's see, I think that might, you know, it's very trolley problem. I think that is when we get to the, yeah, so he, you know, he introduces the family, and again we're seeing, you know, like they're receptive. You know, I did actually wonder if there was going to be some problem, but everyone seems to get along. You know, there's not really any, yeah. And you know, we get the little smile from you know, Kim clearly likes the gift. I thought they did a really great job with, I mean, she's clearly got some infatuation with Martin, and even there at the end, she still smiles at him a little bit. I think she was waiting for the parents to not be able to see that she was smiling. She didn't smile much she didn't smile at him when they were, when the parents were on the opposite side of the table from her and would see, because like if they see her smile, you know, they already know he's over there. He's not hiding. He's not even trying to, like, it is very much this power move of like, yeah, I did it. I told you it would happen. It happened. What are you going to do about it? You know, when Stephen threatens to shoot him, all he says is, but then you won't understand how one shot killed 4 people. Which, I don't know. I feel like I remember something like that happening in Sniper Elite 2, if you get the trick shot just right. Anyway, I think, certainly if you shoot like an explosive, whatever, in that video game. Now, I think that does bring us to, let's see, there's at least one more thing that I really want to make sure to say there, but yeah, you know, you have the thing about like she doesn't want to sing, you know, at that time, and she does later when it's just the two of them. And let's see, I feel like that is when we have the bit with the right. Also, the first time Steven's, you know, like there's the thing about like, you know, oh, his dad died. You know, he was killed instantly. He, you know, he had a car accident, and that is, you know, they don't. Neither of them outright says later, but clearly that was a lie. You know, later he tells the truth. And I appreciated the fact that he doesn't tell the truth because he feels guilty. He tells the truth because it's clear that there's something strange going on, and it's kind of a all hands on deck. Every piece of information that they can use to figure out what's happening, has to be said now kind of situation, you know. And yeah, so they end up, you know, there's the thing about like we could take a walk, and he's like, I don't want to walk the dog though, because I'm scared that it'll attack another dog. And that is an interesting, because I'm not saying that never happens, but like I would hate to be in that situation. I've walked a dog, you know, on more than one occasion. It's I've never had my own. Father wasn't really fond of the idea of you know, he likes chickens, but other than that, not the biggest fan of pets. And so the following is going to have to stay between you and I. But my father likes to say that you know, he keeps chickens because they make eggs, you know. But he thinks, you know, he likes having them as pets. I mean, obviously they're in the actual, you know, hen house. They're not inside, but he really likes feeding them and seeing how happy they are when he brings them food. And yeah. Anyway, I think that is so. So you know, I couldn't help but notice that he specifically, you know, that's where his head goes. You know, because like when I think like, oh, walking a dog, oh yeah, you know, I mean, there's obviously that one uncomfortable aspect of it, but yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess it's PSA time. If you walk a dog, um, please make sure to pick up the shit. You know, it's not comfortable, but it's really fucked up to just leave it in the, yeah. Anyway, I think that does, what was the other thing? Yeah, so they end up going by themselves, and the way the camera pulls back, and you know, the tree behind her takes up more and more of the frame as she's singing. Fantastic. And I also really love, so the song also plays in at least one of the trailers, and yeah, I don't know, I couldn't help but notice, you know, there's this thing about like burning something, and then at the end it goes, you know, because they can put it out. And yeah, I mean, that is a thing, you know. Martin starts a fire, and by the end they manage to put it out, but not without sacrifice, literally. And she does do a great job singing. I don't know for sure if that is the actress or if they dubbed her or something, but whoever is singing does a really great job there. And yeah, you know, that is obviously one of the bits where there is some emotion there, and it is like listen, I'm not saying you have to, but if you are with someone who would like to hear you sing, if you feel comfortable with it, it can be a wonderful experience for, you know, you and them. Um, Obviously, no pressure. I'm just saying that was some of the happiest, you know, in romantic relationship was singing for her. Anyway, I think that pretty much brings us to the, yeah. And so I think that's when Martin suggests that Stephen meet his mom. And so, you know, we have yeah, he insists, you know, please make it, you know, because at first Stephen just says, you know, maybe at some point, I don't know. And then Martin says, tomorrow night at, you know, this particular time. Is that okay? You know, so he's pushing him. And Stephen, he does seem to worry at least somewhat about, you know, Martin's mental state, but he is also letting him push in a way that, considering he later says, oh, he always had mental problems, is a little bit, you know, there's if you think someone is struggling with their mental health and you're not 100% sure that you can help them with it, especially if you're a doctor of some kind, you really do have a responsibility to try to get them in touch with someone who can help them, you know. But some doctors have a god complex. I definitely got the sense that there were times in this movie where he felt like he could just solve things just by willing them into being. I already mentioned the part where he drags Bob, first physically, then verbally. Anyway, I think that does bring us to... Yeah, so, Alicia did indeed make lemonade, and, there's the thing about, like, the movie. And I couldn't help but notice, so they don't... No one says it out loud, but I've watched it enough times. It's very well made, obviously. Probably didn't need me to say that. That movie is obviously Groundhog Day, and they specifically play the part where Bill Murray says, "What makes you think I'm not a god?" And I already mentioned that Stephen has a god complex. I definitely also get the sense that this line applies to Martin. I think we are supposed to think, who exactly in the scene does that most apply to? Or is it more than one? Because Martin behaves like a god. Like, to be threatened with death and respond, well, if you kill me, more will die. That's not something that, like... I mean, I appreciate also, could be like a mental health thing, but it's... right, and at this point, I really need to underline, studies show if, those with mental health problems are more likely to be victims of physical violence rather than perpetrators. But it does sound like something someone struggling with their mental health, might say, but it also sounds like something, a god or someone, like, there's no... he doesn't appear to be at all afraid of dying himself. And let's see, I think that does pretty much... yeah. So, and also, so the movie, Groundhog Day, is also in part about a samey life and, trying to do things differently, and whether or not they work out until, maybe... is that a spoiler? Tell you what, I will just say that if you've watched that movie, you know what ends up happening and why, and take that and apply it to this movie, and I think you will know what I mean. Yeah. But yeah, so we have the thing about, like, I can't watch the entire movie. I didn't tell Alice that I would be late. And instead of just immediately accepting that, the response is, well, can't you just call her and tell her you'll be late? And then, he says, oh, I'm tired. I will go to bed. And it doesn't take long before she flirts very aggressively with him and, like, downright sexually assaults him. She didn't get consent to, yeah, the hand. So once again, obviously I'm not saying that I'm made uncomfortable by someone liking that sexually. I'm uncomfortable by the fact that she did not get consent. And that's supposed to happen. The movie is not... it's not about, like, oh, look at how awesome this is, But yeah, and she makes sure to underline, if you're worried about Martin, he wants this. I don't think Martin was the first person that Stephen was thinking about right then. And he even has to say to Martin later, because Martin is also like, no, I know, why would you not want her? And Stephen has to point out, I'm married. Yeah. Let's see, but yeah, I think that does cover the thing about that. Yeah. So she says, beautiful hands. which on its face, it's like, yeah, I mean, Colin Farrell's conventionally attractive, you know? But then, let's see, I forget the exact word, but the next couple of things said about them is how skilled they are or something like that, and how clean they are. And that feels very loaded to say to someone that you feel has, with their hands, killed someone you love. That is a very, clean, as in nobody even knows that you're a killer. I don't see a drop of blood on there. You must have an amazing soap. And yeah, they're so skillful, yet they couldn't save that particular person. Which is also like, I mean, you could read that as saying, maybe you're not as good with your hands as you'd like to think. I believe it is meant as you could have saved him with your skillful hands, but you didn't, and you're going to pay. And yeah, I think and then wasn't Martin waiting in his office? Like, he is just going, he's crossing so many boundaries. I wanted to say I appreciated the way that I'm not 100% sure if it's like outright spectrum coding or if it is just like social awkwardness, but there's definitely, he can come across as a little, there's something, I appreciated that it didn't really feel like we were ever supposed to like laugh at him for being different. There's definitely a little bit of like, it's making us a little bit uncomfortable, but that makes me really hope that it's not meant as spectrum coding, because that's really fucked up trope. But I think it might be that, he's, this is because he's spending all this time around a man he believes murdered his father. And, this thing of like, well, is the, it's right on the tip of my tongue, I swear. Does this man murder my father? And, there's maybe some, like, he doesn't seem reluctant in carrying out his revenge, but maybe there is some, like, I mean, maybe he's struggling to hide that that's what he's doing. And it is, like, it's a really fucked up part of the revenge, that, because, like, I'm not even sure he needed to do that, but he also, like, the daughter ends up very, Kim ends up very attracted to Martin. That, yeah, I'm not at all sure. And that's, and Martin didn't really seem like, he just goes home in a very yeah. I'll get to that scene. Anyway, I think that does cover. Yeah, and he says the right now I remember. Yeah. So in that morning, you have the thing about like, where's Bob? He's upstairs. He likes to sleep in. Which was also an interesting, because like, she doesn't argue when Steven points out the school bus leaves in 10 minutes. Like, that's barely enough time. Like, is he even gonna have time for breakfast? That's a really, even assuming like, okay, maybe his school bag is packed and all he needs is to step out of bed and get dressed for the day and then eat breakfast. But I don't know if he's gonna have time for all that in 10 fucking minutes. That's not a lot of time. But yeah, this thing of like, and I appreciate it. Both of them kind of seem to think that the other one is too permissive with the kids. Both Alice and Steven, because later, she says, "I'm not like your father. I will take your phone." And let's see. I think that does bring us to the yeah. So Steven goes up there and he keeps insisting. And Bob eventually makes it clear, like, literally, physically, he cannot get out of bed, you know. And it is like, at first it does just sound like, you know, he doesn't feel like going, you know, yeah, getting out of bed right now, you know. And yeah, I like the point made about, you know, I'm not going to drive you to school, and neither is your mother. So you're saying you could, hypothetically. I'm not saying they necessarily should. Like, it's that definitely felt like they're trying to avoid their kid ending up spoiled, because that is the thing. Like, if you, you know, I appreciate that if you are a parent, you cannot let your kid just, you know, like they're you know, that's a situation where they definitely should be able to, you know, yeah. I'm gonna move on. So they get a bunch of tests done. I really appreciated that we didn't have to get bogged down with a bunch of, you know, medical jargon and stuff. We just, you know, like, it's even, we don't even hear all of it. Like, they filmed from outside. We see through the glass, and we can't even make out, you know, much of what they're saying. It's just clear, like, yeah, you know, they did the tests, and you know, they yeah, and so they're like, well, there's nothing, I don't know, maybe psychosomatic. And I appreciate the thing about, like, why are we jumping to psychosomatic already? And it is this thing of, like, over the course of the movie, it kind of vacillates which of whether it's Steven or Alice who is kind of just finding an easy answer and going with that, you know. And yeah, really rude of him to, in front of everyone, just make that joke about, you know, like, this isn't your area of expertise. Like, I appreciate, you know, yeah, they just don't do that to their partner. But yeah, and so they try to take him out of there, and he collapses. And the fact that it was filmed from so far away, every fucking time someone, nearly every single time. Let's see, I think they might have been able to hide him at that time where Bob insists on trying to get to the window, and you know, Alice helps Kim back into bed before going to help him, so he ends up on the floor. I think there might have been, actually right now I don't remember if we could see the floor well enough to see if there was a mat or not, but those other times, I don't even fucking know how they did that without it being really dangerous. Because, like, he was falling on really hard surfaces, you know, that can lead to, like, permanent physical injury. Jesus. But yeah, so yeah, the fact that it's filmed from so far away, and that there's no, they don't, like, cut to, you know, dramatic close up or just a closer shot. It's just the camera hangs far away. Bird's eye view, God's eye view, you know, like, is this these actions of, you know, that was also in IMDb trivia spoiler section, there was something about, like, at least one point it looked like, or was it like Windows kind of had the feeling of eyes watching, you know. But yeah, he collapses, so they take him back. They give him, you know, multiple tests, you know, MRI, MRA. I mean, okay, I guess. Sure, go ahead. Make sure that he is not a men's right activist, because that's something you want to nip in the bud immediately. Has he been listening to Andrew fucking Tate? Jesus. I think that does. Yeah, and so they, you know, I think that's when that's when, you know, Martin shows up, and he's like, I need, you know, you need to check my heart, you know, and they check a bunch, and we have the thing about, like, body hair. You know, you have more body hair than me, but not 3 times as many. And yeah, that is, again, you know, like, just, yeah, kids talking about, you know, yeah, it's an entire thing of, like, you know, sometimes a child will ask a teenager about body hair or something like that, you know. And let's see, think that is when, yeah, and you have the thing about like, oh, I'm sorry about Bob. Oh, don't worry about Bob. He'll be fine. No, he won't. So that's a really fucked up thing to say, and yeah, that's not when he is it? Wait, no? If I recall correctly, it's a little bit later that he gives the information. But yeah, the kids are sent home, and yeah, I noticed that Steven said, if I was in charge of this, of what was it, like spine and brain department, I would feel like a complete failure. And the guy just gives him a look and then turns and says, "Good night, Alice," and then leaves. Steven, you may not have a good night. And yeah, I appreciated this thing of like, I don't know. I know not everybody loves it, but I think it works well when you do this sort of supernatural horror and you include just enough science that it feels like, well, this is something that science cannot solve. Because like, I don't know, I've met people who feel like that ruins it because like the rest of the movie, they're just sitting there thinking science could solve this. I think when you do something like that in a movie, and maybe this is obvious to a lot of you, but just in case someone watching this video also feels, that it's wrong to include, the way I see it is they're acknowledging, yes, normally science would be able to solve this, but in this case it can't. And that's very scary to imagine that all this power we have over a life and death now, what if it were taken away? Earlier in this video I mentioned, we live 3 times longer than we used to, for the longest fucking time. I'm afraid I don't remember the exact number, but there was, or not exact, but average number, but you can look it up. It was quite some time that we human beings, like our entire species, it was normal for us to die around age 30. I forget it was 35 specifically, but somewhere around that, and yeah. Let's see. Yeah, it's not too terribly long after that Martin says, how did oh, you stood me up at the at the diner. I've called you 100 times, and the oh right, I think this is also around the place. Yeah. So we have the thing where Kim comes home late, and she's not even really yelled at. Alice just says, "You don't have to walk the dog. I did it earlier." Because we were told that was her responsibility. And I also like that little parenting moment. Bob wants to walk the dog, and I forget if it was Stephen or Alice, but one of them says, "You're a little too young to be walking by yourself outside." And that is true. That's not even them being like super restrictive or something. There is a little bit of an age difference there, and there is some jealousy because like, I want to walk the dog, and yeah, and him watering the plants is like, yeah, sure, like that's literally right outside the front door. Like there's not really, and it looks like it's a pleasant enough neighborhood, but you can't know for sure if he's walking away. And also, would he walk far away to outside of that neighborhood? Well, yeah, he might walk outside of the neighborhood for the dog shit, I can imagine. Anyway, the yeah, I think that's yeah. So Kim comes home and she says, "Oh, I was out with Martin. He drove me on his friend's motorcycle." And then we have the line about like, "I don't like you doing that if you're not wearing a helmet." "Oh, it's okay. I wore a helmet. I wore Martin's helmet." And in the trailer, they actually did put that line over footage of that very much not being the case. In the movie, there's not a huge amount of running time between, but yeah, when we see it, it is like, I don't think what we're seeing right now is the first time that she did not wear a helmet. I think she is just lying to her mother. And did she lie before meeting Martin? I'm not sure she did. I don't think we caught her in a lie before that part, but he is having a negative influence on her, Anyway, I think that does bring us nicely to, yeah, so we have the part where, yeah, so that's when Martin explains, and yeah, at first Stephen tries to finally lay down some fucking rules, but Martin says, "Listen, I'll say it fast, okay?" And he explains, and I appreciated that he actually said, because like we, the viewer, had a feeling that that was it. And I like that the movie didn't, wait longer. And also that we ultimately didn't get a clear answer. Like, I think it was the keychains, but maybe not, Maybe that was just to earn their trust. And they never say, oh, it's this particular religion or something. And but yeah, you have he lays it out. But before he does, he says, you probably already figured it out. I don't think Stephen was thinking in those terms. Like, I think he may have had a feeling that Martin, he didn't like the way Martin was behaving, but I don't think he was thinking curse, especially not lethal, And honestly, I just wanted to briefly note, so once again, props to the stunt team. The fact that Bob doesn't even react, like, I'm sorry, if I'm dragged around like that and then dropped like that, I think I would make a sound of like pain and frustration and not being believed and things like that. But yeah, and also the part where so I think that's after Martin's. Yeah, so I'll just very briefly cover. So yeah, Martin lays it all out, and the police take him out of there. And not long after, we see, because he says, the first thing is incapacitated legs. The second is refusing to eat. And I appreciated that they didn't pretend like, oh, well, they'll still be fine. No, they end up, what was it, like feeding tubes? Was that what it was called? Something like that. But the, then bleeding from the eyes and then death. And when the third one happens, which, if you don't remember, was bleeding from the eyes, death will be imminent. But yeah, after, very shortly after that, Bob refuses to eat. And that, again, we see Stephen refusing to accept the circumstance. And I get it, but it's like, well, I guess we're going to have to use the feeding tube then. Instead, first he says, I know you think we're going to be mad because we don't like you eating donuts. We won't be mad. Eat the donuts. When Bob still refuses, he tries to shove the food inside the child's mouth. Just so fucked up, And again, purposefully so. Wouldn't be watching, like, I knew before I watched Dogtooth, I had been warned, Yorgos Lanthimos will show you things you cannot unsee. And if the movies weren't this fucking good, I would not be seeking out, I don't need shit like that from movies that are ass. Anyway, I think, which is of course the only place where it would be shit, because that's comes with the ass. Anyway, I think that is yeah, so then not very long after, we see Kim at choir, and I love that we, like, from the very start, we the viewer know what's about to happen because Martin laid it out and everything he said has come true so far about that. I mean, right, it was also so fucking creepy when Martin says, no, I want you to be with my mom. That in and of itself, okay, that's not the worst thing I've heard. But then he says she has a great body. They also made sure to put that one in the trailer. So that's, yeah. Anyway, the, the choir, and I love that we saw across through, because the camera will move just slightly, because it's like, it's reflection. There's not actually a cross behind them, but it just looks like, there's essentially a cross overlaid over the choir. And the camera is somewhat closer. And we spend like maybe 30 seconds or something before she actually falls, even though the moment we see her at choir, like, my first thought was, any second now she's going to fall. There's no way that that's not what's about to happen. Yeah. Jesus Christ. And then God, the part where, so Martin, he doesn't come up there to visit, but he calls her, and she's like, can't you come up? And he apparently asked, can't you come down? And so she said, no, I can't walk. Oh, you're in the parking lot. And she manages to walk up to the window, and then suddenly he isn't there, even though we saw him there moments ago, and just so fucking creepy. And the way that Kim acts, like, yeah, I think she was probably the character that creeped me out the most. And there's also the part later, which they also made sure to put in the trailer, in addition to, I think, every single time someone fell. Um, but yeah, I really appreciate it. Let's see. I don't think we saw that. We saw a bit from there. We also saw some of the crawling, but I don't think we saw all of it. Anyway, we saw her lighting something, but we couldn't see that he was the one sitting there. I actually thought she's starting a fire or something, but we didn't see that. We didn't see that anyone was even aimed at, much less shot. Like, I can see a lot of trailers that would have included those last several minutes of the or a part very close to the very end with the three of them tied up. Yeah, and anyway, I think that does. Yeah, Kim talking about, so yeah, the part that was in the trailer, her talking about, like, oh, you'll like it. Don't worry, you'll get used to being incapacitated. Yeah, that's genuinely, like, if okay, so it's important to underline that when I use the following term, I do not mean sexually, but Martin has essentially groomed her. This is like cult shit, like the way she's talking about, like, don't worry about this situation that is, yeah, disturbing to imagine. But yeah, and he gives her back the use of her legs, but only very briefly. And then Bob, because Kim, sis is doing, older sibling is doing it, I want to do it too. So he tries to walk to the window, and he of course falls, and it's just, oh my god. Let's see, and yeah, that's the part where she mutters, "Fuck you," and then pretends she said nothing. And Alice takes her phone, and yeah. Right. I also like the thing about, she apparently keeps losing. She lost 2 MP3 players in 10 days, and she apologizes profusely. Was that the personal item? Because, like, one of them was hers, and the other one was his. So maybe that's how the curse was placed? I wouldn't rule out. Maybe it's some of both. Maybe it's both taking something from them and giving them something else. Now, I think that is the I really appreciate how well Yorgos Lanthimos does at these, like, uncomfortable, but sometimes, like, feeling like, yeah, that's what would happen, kind of dynamics for families, siblings, parents, kids, that sort of thing. Anyway, I think that is when, yeah, so, they end up just being sent home and having to live off that food. And then yeah, oh my god, the part where, so Stephen has accepted that Martin is behind it, so he goes to his house, and Martin won't open. Like, I agree with Stephen, Martin is in there, and refusing to open. But he, even though, like, I mean, I feel like the neighbors could probably hear, he threatens to fuck them. And I mean, I feel like afterwards he says, "You will die in prison." That seems like less of a, but the other, I don't know, the fact that he starts by responding to revenge with a threat of revenge of his own, because, like, "You will die in prison," I feel like that's something that makes sense to say to someone who is trying to kill someone else, and hasn't yet, stop this or you will die in prison. Anyway, the I think that does bring us to the Yeah, I believe that's when she talks to the yeah, she talks to Martin, and we get the, oh my god, the part about the fucking spaghetti, the way he talks about, like, well, you know, I used to think it was only me and my dad who ate spaghetti like that. They would say, oh, look at that boy eat spaghetti. And then I found out everyone eats it like this. And that hurt even more than my father dying. Jesus fucking Christ. That's a supremely awful thing to say. But yeah. And, in amongst that, he also says, I don't know, I feel like this is the only way of getting justice. Just like, casually, like, I don't know. I think I'll go buy another watch. Maybe. We'll see. And yeah, she points out, why am I paying? Why are my children paying? Another line they put in the trailer. So again, really appreciate how much they managed to put in the trailer that give you a sense of it, but doesn't give too much away. Because like I had no idea from the trailer the whole, let's see, the curse thing, the fact that it was the I don't know. I thought that there was something about, because they bring up ologism in the trailer as well. I thought that maybe it was an ologist doing this, and he was, ologizing them rather than that it was a curse. Right. I just have to briefly also note the incredibly fucked up. So yeah, I'll just briefly note. He also, Martin tells her, about he claims that Stephen was more into it than, was the case, which of course, as soon as Alice confronts him, he can't exactly say that he didn't spend time alone in a room with this woman and, continue talking to her after. I mean, I'm sorry, but the thing about, like, oh, you have beautiful hands, that feels like crossing a line. That feels, yeah, don't say that to someone who's married, unless it's to you. And let's see, I think that does, yeah. So we also have so there are two scenes where it looks like they'll get sexual, and the second time it doesn't happen. But Stephen and Alice, the first time, yeah, the I mean, once again, I want to underline, I am not yucking their yum. I'm not kink shaming or anything. I'm just saying I feel like it says something about him in this specific case. Like, if you're doing that in the real world, if, everyone who participates is consenting adults, then I don't see a problem with it. I think in this movie it says something about him that, yeah, the sex, it starts with her, she takes off, she strips down to her underwear, and then she asks, fully sedated. And unfortunately, it means exactly what we think it means. She lies down on the bed and acts like she can't move. And then he, starts. Like, I appreciate that we didn't see more of it. It didn't, like, last too long. That could have gotten really gratuitous. But, like, we get the point. This is how, yeah. He spends so much time around ologized patients that he is now, it's he's now sexually attracted to that idea. And later she does it without, first asking, and she's even naked, I think, or at least topless, something along those lines, and he does not act on it, and that felt very much like he is, he can't quite, because of the state the kids are in, and she's maybe trying to find some, moment of happiness in their lives. But I think that is around the time where we get the, did she talk to, okay, I'll briefly talk about, so she also talks to the ologist, and he immediately says, oh yeah, it was definitely his fault, or wait, no, let's see, at first he says he doesn't remember the patient. And then not long after, he says, I remember now, I'll give you some information. I can't give you the file, though. And I don't know if maybe he did remember from right away, but at first he didn't, because there was the thing about, like, yeah, because he gives the information after she agrees she'll do that thing that she didn't do after dinner. And yeah, like, both of them remember that he asked if, if they could get sexual. And I wonder if this means that they met before she got married to Stephen, or if he asked a married woman, because I do think there is, there's a certain degree of honesty in this movie about how, yeah, married people do sometimes cheat. And the way that it, it almost becomes a little weaponized. Like, if I recall correctly, she cheats on him after, she thinks that he cheated on her. And she does it for information. She uses her sexuality not because she's attracted to him. She's using her sexuality to accomplish something. And that is, of course, like many women will tell you, that is sometimes, a choice a woman has to make, whether she's willing to do that, which helps underline that we need more gender equality. Women should never, no one, obviously, should ever feel like they have to do that. And yeah, the fact that she was willing to do that to save her kids, in my opinion, there's some of both. It's, I mean, I don't know if it's like revenge, but maybe she feels like now they're even, but it's definitely also to save the kids. And yeah, Ologist does not even mince words. He's like, it was for sure his fault, but we're the only ones who know. But yeah, she confronts him, and he doesn't even really particularly defend himself against the accusation of having cheated. And yeah, my God, the part where, so yeah, he's like, the kids are feeling better. Maybe we should, or maybe it'll make the kids feel better if we go to the summer home, which is also like, wow, that is, they are very well off then if they have a fucking summer home. But yeah, that's where his head's at. And, he's in denial. And at that point, she's trying to be, she's trying to focus on, what can we do? And he's enraged by that because he feels, I mean, I think on some level he probably feels like maybe he isn't doing as much as he should. Maybe it's even his fault. And I'm not saying it necessarily is. Like, I don't think anybody deserves this kind of, but it is, and I don't think that the movie is saying, it is deserved, because, like, ultimately, like, Bob had nothing to do with what happened, Anyway, I think that is when... Yeah, I appreciate how strong an impact Alicia Silverstone made for very little screen time. Like, what was it, like 3-4 minutes? And it was only the one scene. It wasn't even separated into chunks over the course of the movie. Now, I think that is when... Yeah, so, he's enraged, and he becomes really abusive. Like, he doesn't physically assault her personally, but it is domestic abuse to throw things around, yeah. And the thing he says also is like, he's saying, well, it's a curse, there's nothing we can do, when it's also like, I mean, I don't mean to be insensitive, but I feel like at least one thing to do, and you are trying to not think in those terms, and I understand that, but understand that decision. But that is, yeah. And sadly, it does happen for cishet white men to get angry with women, including women close to them, including sometimes their partner, when the woman points out There is a problem here. You are not dealing with it. I think we should deal with it. And yeah, so he captures Martin and, you know, takes him to the chair, punches him, and, you know, my God, the part where, so at this point, I think maybe Martin, I don't know if he is supernatural or it's just that the supernatural is also protecting him, but yeah, the part where, you know, so he bites, which, like, holy shit. I'm not speaking from experience, but I'm pretty sure normally human beings cannot make that kind of, you know, shit. When I see a humanoid bite that effectively in a piece of fiction, it tends to be like a zombie or humanoid alien or something, you know. But after that, he bites into his own flesh, and not long after, it has healed perfectly. So there's definitely something there. And yeah, I think that is when, let's see, yeah, so, and Kim crawls all the way down, my God, down those stairs, Jesus, to light his cigarette, you know, and ask if she can have her legs back. And yeah, I appreciated the fact that she does remain, like, there's something between them, even perhaps not. It doesn't seem like he wants something romantic between them. But even after he turns her down, like, I know and understand there's a lot of people who would not be willing to. They would not have anything to do with him after that. I mean, she couldn't have been more overt in, you know, suggesting, yeah. Let's see. I think that does bring us to the, yeah, and, you know, she tells him, you know, we could drive away together on your friend's motorcycle. And it's not terribly long after that that she's just missing. And they drive, it was such a striking image seeing, you know, Alice driving the car, which, like, it also makes sense, like, where are you going to get better lights, you know? And you're going to want to get Kim into the car as soon as you do find her. And Stephen walking around outside and looking, and yeah, she got far. And I appreciated that we actually saw that she had been brought back before we saw, I think before we even saw her missing, but certainly before we saw them find her. You know, it didn't just cut directly from, oh, they found her, to now she's back home. We saw her back home, and we saw how bloodied her knees were. Like, oh my God, that's so fucked up. That's such, and it's not even like, it's not super graphic. Like, I feel like there's a lot of horror movies where they would be like, oh, we gotta go further. Let's have like a bone poking through the skin or something. And it's like, you don't need that. It's just because it's in our head now. It's in our head as the viewer thinking. Can you imagine? Can you fucking imagine crawling until your knees bleed that much and then still crawling? When they find her, she is still crawling. God, that's fucked up. Yeah. Because, like, you can give your knee a Smurf kick right now and you'll feel, oh, right. A Smurf kick, is that just what we Danes call it? It's this. That's a Smurf kick. Anyway, let's see. Yeah, I think that is it for, yeah, that's when the eye bleeding starts. And immediately it's like, oh shit. You know, there's not much movie left. And I really appreciate, I think it would have been agonizing if they spent forever after that. Because, like, at that point, yeah, you know, Stephen does essentially the one thing he could do. He decides that he is going to, you know, yeah, one of the kids is going, yeah, he's going to kill him. And I think they maybe have a sense of it because, you know, Bob cuts his hair. It's like, just when you're making the decision, keep that in mind. And And that's also, yeah, like after a while, they just start crawling around the house. Like they cannot accept not being able to walk. And that is something I have heard people who become permanently physically disabled, they really struggle to accept that it is, yeah, a permanent situation, especially if it happens when you're still young and when you used to enjoy, you know, because they had joie de vivre. They liked being alive. They wanted to go and do things, you know. They both wanted to go to that party, for example. He wanted to walk the dog. Yeah. Let's see. I think that does bring us to the so yeah, and also just the visual of the blood, and it's not that there's that much blood even, but it's enough. It's deeply upsetting watching. Yeah, and we're watching it be wiped away, and we're seeing all that there's on the other side, you know. And they don't linger forever, but it's long enough that it's very, very uncomfortable and disturbing. And that is also, like, if blood is coming out the eyes, there's something really serious going on. That is not, you know, like the there are situations where if it's not very much blood and you can point to, well, you know, there's a little bit of like you know, like I don't know, if you prick your finger, for example, and a little bit of blood, you know, comes out, well, that's, you know, I mean, rinse the wound. You may need a bandage, that sort of thing, but it's not like fatal. But blood out the eyes, that's flags as red as the blood is. But yeah, so he goes to the teacher or something and asks, you know, what are the kids, you know, if you had to choose one. That's so fucked up. That is yeah. And yeah, Alice releases Martin. And it is also this thing of like, you know, what, I mean, you're not getting anything out of having him there. And again, Stephen just doesn't accept that. You know, they've had him there for a little while, and nothing has changed for the better. And he's not saying or doing anything that suggests that it will. So she's thinking outside the box, and maybe, you know, what's the thing? Like, he's at that point in like the anger stage of grief, and she's in bargaining, you know. And yes, I know technically, you know, not everybody goes through those 5 stages. It's yeah. Anyway, I think that does bring us to so yeah, you know, the let's see. Yeah, so he tells her, you know, let's come down there, and she's like, well, the kids are already there. And then the camera shows first the kids and then also Alice, all of them, you know, taped to the, yeah, you know, he's keeping them immobile, and a good bit of setup and payoff, because like, this is something he's willing to do under extreme circumstances, because he did it with Martin, you know. And he loads the rifle that he was earlier intending to use on Martin, and yeah, just I was thinking that it was going to be a deadly game of eeny, meeny, miny, mo, but he had other ideas. Must have gotten really dizzy too. And yeah, just it's such a fucked up scene. That's part of why I'm making jokes. Holy shit. And again, it lingers long enough that it's deeply disturbing, but not so long that it just becomes like, because I forget who said it, but someone pointed out everything that is funny can become scary under certain circumstances, context, and such, and vice versa. And this is a scary situation that could easily end up being like, you know, there is, you know, it would not be super difficult to recreate the scene in a scary movie, perhaps one of the scary movies, and just, yeah, exaggerate it a little bit. But yeah, and he shoots, doesn't score. Third time's the charm, though, and I also really appreciate that we didn't yeah, they didn't feel the need to squib up Bob. We just see, there's enough blood there that it's unmistakable. He's dead, and he's also not moving. So the combination there, and that does it does seem like he died immediately. It was enough of a, yeah, he hit somewhere that had that effect. And yeah, shortly after, we see them in the diner. And by then, we all already feel like, okay, that must mean Kim can walk again. And, very, very shortly after, we do indeed see her walking, and completely comfortably, no assistance needed or anything. And Martin's just sitting there, worked out the way he wanted to. He said that's the closest he can think of to justice. There's nothing particularly threatening about. He's sitting there like he knows, and he knows they know he knows, and there's nothing they can do to him. Because what the fuck are they gonna do? They're gonna go to the cops and say, "Oh, he cursed us." Yeah. And the little smile that Kim still gives him after all of that, just yeah. Because I don't know, I wouldn't rule out that on some level she thinks Martin spared me. He could have cursed. He could have placed a curse that would have gotten me killed too. Maybe she feels Martin is more responsible for her still being alive than her father's particular aim with the gun.